Okay, Shabbat Shalom and welcome to United Israel World Union. This is our Sabbath morning scripture study. Thank you so very much for joining us. I am happy to be here with you today. I'm excited about the class. I'm excited about the series. We are currently in a series that I've titled Honest to Moses. Honest to Moses. And what we're doing in this particular series is we're on a quest, if you will, for the historical Moses. Now, the historical Moses, you might say, what is the historical Moses? We're attempting to get at what is the clearest picture historically of Moses that we can find from the biblical text. The texts are our primary source. Everything else is secondary. When it comes to searching for the historical Moses, we're going to the text, we're looking at the text closely, and I believe that it's very important to do so. Now, there are a lot of people who believe that this is a futile exercise or a futile exercise. One second, I'm doing one thing. Okay. And that Moses, from a historical standpoint, according to these primarily what some would call liberal scholars, but let's call them minimalist. I like the word minimalist better because the minimalist is one who takes it to the lowest possibility. Many of these minimalist scholars believe that if there was a Moses, and then they build from there. So they start with the question that he may not have existed at all. Our view is different. Our view is that Moses did indeed exist, and we are on a quest to discover everything that we can about Moses, and that's what this series is all about. Now, I understand that there are quite a few things within the text that present challenges to the person who's seeking. There are some conflicting reports on face value, and we have to get at that, and we have to really look at it and pull it apart and make sure that we understand that if there are multiple answers, if you will, to a singular question, then we have to consider those different answers. We have to put everything on the table. Now, I believe that we can discover the historical Moses from the sources, and when I say sources, again, the biblical texts are our primary sources. Everything else is secondary in nature. But I believe that we can discover with a good deal of reliability certain things about Moses. Some things we all know, some things maybe will be new to us as we work our way through. The biblical authors actually provide us with considerable data. There's considerable material about Moses within the biblical text. Now, again, where the biblical authors give us multiple answers to our questions, we simply put everything out on the table and allow the evidence to provide or allow the text to inform us of the most probable answer that works in all situations. So the question becomes, what is it that the Bible does tell us about Moses? Again, there are a lot of things that we just simply don't know. Whenever we look at things from a historical point, we have to be honest with the text, honest to Moses. So there are some things that we just simply aren't provided by the text. We get that. We understand that. So what we are going to do, though, is look for those things which are revealed. Remember in Deuteronomy 29:29, the things which are not revealed, and the things which are revealed. That's a paraphrase. That's the Ross Nichols quick version. But the idea is that those things which are revealed belong unto us and to our children and should be rightly passed down. Now, last week, I began a story, began in the series to talk about the family of Moses. What do we know from the text about the family of Moses? And we touched just briefly on the fact that Moses is descended from the house of Levi or Levi. We're going to go deeper on that today. But we talked about other things associated with the text or with the family of Moses from within the text. We talked about how, according to certain texts, Moses seems to be one of at least three siblings. The other two are one of three, the other two being Miriam, who is the oldest, and then Aaron, and we showed that. We showed that from the text. We know from two texts in the Pentateuch that Aaron is 3 years older than Moses. We covered that last week. And we know that Miriam is older because she's the one, according to Exodus 2, even though she's not named, that is watching the baby Moses as he is in Yom Suf, as he is in the Sea of Reeds. And she pushes the reeds and places the basket, and she watches over him until the unnamed Pharaoh's daughter discovers the baby. Last week, we touched on the idea, we introduced the family of Moses with a little more detail, adding, we know that Moses' father is a man by the name of Amram. And we also know that his mother is a woman by the name of Yocheved. So we know that. We know the father and the mother, Amram and Yocheved. We also know, again, from Exodus chapter 2 and verse 1, though they're not named in this passage, that they are Levites. So go with me this morning. Let's kick off there. Exodus chapter 2 and verse 1. Exodus 2:1. We're talking today about the Levitical Link. The title for my class today is the Levitical Link. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. So there you go. So we know that both the father and the mother of Moses are from the tribe or the house of Levi. When it describes Amram, though he's not named, it says, Ish mi Beit Levi, a man from the house of Levi. And when it describes Yocheved, it says she is a Bat Levi. Now, I talked about another possible solution to that last week's class, but you can get that there. So the question becomes, what do we know about the familial link? What do we know about this house of Levi, this tribe of Levi, from which we get Moses, and we get Aaron, and we get Miriam? What do we know, especially up to this point? Now, this is not a full survey on the Levites, but I will tell you this, that if we are to truly understand the biblical narrative, particularly ancient religion within Israel, we have to fully explore over the course of our time, over the next months and years, we have to really get into this, because this contains, within the study of the Levites, contains some of the most important material in all of biblical literature. In fact, when it comes to the academic approach to the Bible, much is based upon a true understanding of what the text says about the Levites. So what I'm concerned about in this class, or what I want to focus on in this class, is what does the Bible say about Levi in particular, as it might shed light on the historical Moses. The biblical authors clearly tell us that Moses is a descendant of Levi. So what we want to do, first of all, is go back and we want to look at Levi. We want to understand who is this source from which we get Moses and Aaron and Miriam. Remember, Micah 6:4 talks about these three lead Israel out of Egyptian bondage. So these are important. It's all three of them are important. Different levels of participation, you might say, or for different reasons are important. But all three have this heavy task. So go with me this morning to the book of Genesis, chapter 29, and I want to read verse 34. Actually, let's start in verse 31. Okay, it says, the Lord, this is the Tetragrammaton, Yehovah, Jehovah saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son and named him Reuven, for she declared, it means the Lord has seen my affliction. It also means now my husband will love me. Now, it's interesting, the names mean something in the Hebrew Bible. So what Leah is doing in the naming of Reuven is she's using a play on the Hebrew word for see, ra'ah. So she's using this particular word to build the name, see? And then it says, she conceived again and bore a son and declared, this is because Jehovah heard, Yehovah heard, and that I was unloved and has given me this one also. So she named him Shimeon, which it's tied to the Hebrew, this Shema, which means to hear or to listen. So she's indicating how her pleas to God. God has seen that she's unloved. He's heard that this was a situation. And so she names these children to indicate that God is responsive to her plea. Now look at verse 34. Again she conceived and bore a son and declared, this time my husband will become attached to me, for I have borne him 3 sons. Now, this particular section of text begins by expressing to us, first of all, we're in patriarchal times. This is the days of Jacob, as Jacob and Leah and Rachel and Bilhah and Zilpah are building what will become the nation of Israel. It's the building of the family. So we have to go all the way back to this point. And we want to notice that Leah feels unloved. In Hebrew, the root word there is the same word for hated. So she feels rejected and despised and unloved. And so as she begins to bear children, she sees this as a way to prove that God has heard her cries and seen the way she's been treated probably. And then we're going to pick up here because we want to talk about Levi, and that's the 3rd son. Now remember, there's another thing that I want to point out. We've covered this obviously in plenty of other classes. Leah's womb is miraculously opened, and she begins to bear. She gives credit to God for the bearing of these children. Rachel, according to the text, remains barren at this point. But again, Reuven is an indication that God has seen. Shimeon is that God has heard. And then in verse 34, like so many names and these two preceding it, it's a play. Now, this time, you see, it's like 3rd time is a charm. This is our 3rd child. This time, Ye Lavel. Let me look at this in Hebrew. I was telling Mark earlier that I have so many Bibles out and I need the Hebrew open, so I guess what we're going to do is use the old trusty iPad, because then I can go back and forth between the Hebrew and the English. And I want to look at Genesis 29 and 34 to get a peek at what the Hebrew is telling us. Okay. It says, Yilaveh. Now, Yilave ishi, she says this time, Yilave ishi means my husband, he will attach to me, or he will connect with me, or he will join with me. You see, she is naming the child in a way that ties to this idea, which I'm going to explain fully today, of being connected, being joined. So my husband will become attached to me. Why? Because I've borne him 3 sons. So she believes that this third child is going to do the trick. It's going to forever connect her with her husband. We have to assume then that even after Reuben and even after Simeon, that connection wasn't felt by her. But she believes that this child is going to be the connector. This child is going to be the glue that bonds her with her husband. Now, she calls him Levi. Now, here's what most people believe. Most people believe that Levi, Lamed Vav Yud, is connected. See, I'm using this word connected to the Hebrew word above in the sentence or in the verse where it says that root word is Lamed Vav He. So there's a final letter that's different between the two. So let me get something out of the way, and you're going to all run to your Strong's and your Gesenius and your BH, different concordances, and to prove me wrong, but you won't. Levi is not connected to the word that she uses above where she says Yilave. Those two words are not connected. Yilave it means to connect, to bond or to join, but the name doesn't mean that. Here's a simple point for you. We don't know what the name means. What we do know is that she is making an association. It sounds like, the name Levi sounds like Lava, but they're not connected. So it's sort of an inside deal. She's making an inside point. The etymology of Lamed Vav He, Lava, does mean to connect, to join, it can mean accompany, to go along with. So the idea, very plainly stated, is that she believes that the birth of this child will bring them together. Now, we're going to go into this a little bit more in a few minutes, but I have to give a little bit more background. So stay tuned. We're going to come back to this idea. I'll give you some examples that will make that really connect for you. Now, aside from genealogical information, Genesis only gives us one other detail about Levi. Only one other detail. Go with me to the book of Genesis, chapter 34. Genesis, chapter 34. Now, the story is about Dinah. Dinah is a daughter also of Leah, a daughter of Leah and Jacob. And the story in Genesis chapter 34 is that she goes out to visit the daughters of the land. So she's going to make friends in the neighborhood, if you will. And Dinah goes out, and a young man by the name of Shechem, the son of Hamor, sees her, and he basically falls in love with her, I think. Now, I know that many study Bibles call this the rape of Dinah, but we're not going into the fullness of the story today. But let's just say that he does take her, and he lays with her. Now, once this happens, word gets out. But as the word is getting out, Shechem goes to his father and says, I want her to be my wife. So the tribal groups meet, and it is agreed upon that if the men of Shechem will become circumcised, then they'll be able to marry in between the two clans. So that was what was discussed. Now what we're going to do is we're going to work down to verse 25. They do go through with it, by the way. They feel like these Hebrew women are worth the effort and worth the trouble and worth the pain. And so they go through with the rite of circumcision. And on the third day when they're sore, this is where we pick up. So verse 25 says, on the third day, when they were in pain, Simeon and Levi, two of Jacob's sons and brothers of Dinah, took each his sword. They came upon the city unmolested and slew all the males. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword. They took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. And the other sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the town because their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and asses and all that was inside the town and outside, all their wealth, all their children, their wives, all that was in the houses they took as captives and booty. Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me, making me odious among the inhabitants of the land. The Canaanites and the Perizzites, my men are few in number, so that if they unite against me and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed. So he's basically said, you've gone so far with this that we're in a very bad place right now. And their response is, should our sister be treated like a whore? So they feel justified in their actions, and Jacob is more reserved in his judgment. Of course, he doesn't think that this should be the treatment of his daughter, but he's also worried now that this is going to blow up and the whole family's going to get taken out, you see, because he's outnumbered. Now, whenever we read this, I want you to understand that never, for the rest of Jacob's days, does he get over this feeling. He doesn't go back and say, you know, the more I think about it, I'm glad that the boys slew that whole town and hamstrung the beast. I'm glad that happened. He doesn't say that. He never goes to that point. He, in fact, on his deathbed, he brings it up again. Go with me to Genesis 49. Genesis 49. And I want to set the stage here because Genesis 49 is more than just the words of an old man passing on blessings. According at least to the text, it seems to be prophetic. All right, so what Jacob says is he sets this thing up by saying, gather around me, assemble yourselves, sons of Jacob, gather around me, and I will tell you what will befall you b'acharit hayamim, in the latter days. Now this at least is understood as a prophetic picture of what's going to take place or what's going to happen in regards to the tribes. So what we want to do is look down at verse 5. Verse 5. Simeon and Levi are a pair. Their weapons are tools of lawlessness. Let not my person be included in their counsel. Let not my being be counted in their assembly. For when angry, they slay men, and when pleased, they maim oxen. Cursed be their anger so fierce, and their wrath so relentless. I will divide them in Jacob, scatter them in Israel. Well, I want you to get the impact of that. Imagine that the last thing you hear from your father is this. Let that sink in. Is it, he says, he talks about lawlessness. He doesn't want to be included with these. I mean, these are the big points. Let not my being be counted in their assembly. For when angry, they slay men. You get mad, you kill men. When you're happy, you maim oxen. Very strong. So then you notice, I'll divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So what happens is exactly that. We know that this predicts the basic, the idea, and what comes to fruition is that both of these tribes end up landless. They end up landless. Now, you're going to think, well, yeah, Ross, but there's more to the story. Of course, there's always more to the story. But it's interesting that both Simeon and Levi are landless, and these words in Genesis 49 predict that precise thing. Simeon is later absorbed basically into or taken into the tribal allotment of Judah, and of course the house of Levi. We get in later biblical text a different reason for them being landless. I'll give you one example. I don't want to go too deeply into this now, but here's what Deuteronomy 18 says about the reason for the lack of land for Levi. Deuteronomy 18. Jacob says he's going to scatter them and so forth. But Deuteronomy 18 says, the Levitical priest, the whole tribe of Levi, shall have no territorial portion with Israel. They shall live only off Jehovah's offerings by fire as their portion, and shall have no portion among their brethren or their brother tribes. Jehovah's their portion, as he promised them. Okay? So that's one understanding of why Levi is landless. Jacob said they would be scattered in Israel, and they were. Now, we're going to get into this more as the story unfolds, but I wanted to make this point that this is pretty much all we know about Levi leading up to the story of the birth of Moses. You mean that's it? We know a couple of things. We know that Levi, the name sounds like a word that means to attach, to join, to connect. It doesn't mean that. We don't know what it means, but we know it is the way Leah wanted this to be communicated. So imagine, and I'll make this point, when Leah says, Levi, come in, the people might say, what does that even mean? Why did you name him Levi? Where'd you get that name? She's like, I just like the way it sounds, you see, because it means it's connected with Daddy. So she likes the way it sounds. It doesn't mean to connect or to join or to accompany, just sounds like it. But what we know is that Leah wanted the name to sound like, because to her, she felt like this third one is the charm. This third son is going to connect me to my husband. We know that from Genesis 29. And then we know that Jacob has a major problem with Levi, that he is part of a cruel team who took things too far in his wrath, and that's it. Aside from a brief genealogical notice in Genesis other than genealogical, where it mentions Levi in list of sons. Other than that, so go with me to Genesis 46. Genesis 46. Again, I'm touching some high points. I cannot go into every bit of detail, so I'm just hitting what's important for this class. So I know that there are other things that people want to bring in, but just so you know, I want to get to certain points. Genesis 46:11. Levi's sons, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. So we get a notice that Levi has three sons in Genesis 46:11. Their names are Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Now look with me at a verse we touched on last week, Exodus chapter 6. We're going to begin to build this family of Moses, basically looking closer with our focus on Levi. So Exodus chapter 6, and let's look at verse 16. These are the names of Levi's sons by their lineage: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And the span of Levi's life was 137 years. Okay? So we again, just like in Genesis 46:11, that checks out. We know he's got three sons. Here they are. Now we have another detail that he lives to be 137 years old. Now we're going to follow the line, but I want you to go down to verse 20, because verse 17, 18, and 19 are other, let's see. I'm sorry. Let's go ahead and look at verse 18. The sons of Kohath. Now remember, Levi has three sons, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Now we're looking at this middle son, Kohath. The sons of Kohath, Amram, Itzar, Hebron, Uzziel, and the span of Kohath's life was 133 years. All right, and then it gets into Merari. Now look at verse 20. Amram took to wife his father's sister Yocheved, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. And the span of Amram's life was 137 years. So Amram is a descendant of Levi through Kohath. So it helps if you write this down. You put Levi at the top. You can list all three sons, but we're just following the Kohath, the line of Kohath. So you got Levi, Kohath, and then Kohath has several sons, but we're focusing on Amram. All right, so you got Amram. Now on your list, go back up to Amram and go back above to Kohath and draw a line across and write a lady's name by the name of Yocheved. So Amram, the father of Moses, has a sister named Yocheved. You see that? Let's see. 1 point. Amram took Amram took to wife his sister of his father Yocheved, and she bore him Aaron and Moses. So if I misstated that, it's hard to do without the chart in front of me. So you get it though. You have Levi, you have Kohath, you have Amram, and then Amram takes to wife his father's sister. So he takes Kohath's sister. My bad. Got it. So it's interesting. Levi lives to be 137. Kohath is 133. And Amram is 137. Just happens to live the same length as his grandfather. Now, I want to go back and talk a little bit more about the name Levi. Levi sounds like lava, which means to connect, to join, to bind together, if you will. And that word is used in 12 passages in the Hebrew Bible. So I want to make this clear as I work my way through. The 12 times I'm not going to read all of them, but I want to give you an example. So go with me to Isaiah chapter 14. Isaiah chapter 14. And we're just going to pick up Isaiah chapter 14, verse 1. I feel like I messed up on the genealogy enough to make sure I have this clear for you and me. Amram takes his father, which is Kohath. He takes Kohath's sister, Yocheved. So Amram marries his aunt, Yocheved, and they bring forth Moses, Aaron, Miriam. Thank you. I got it now. Isaiah 14, verse 1. But the Lord will pardon Jacob and will again choose Israel and will settle them on their own soil. And strangers shall join with them and shall cleave to the house of Jacob. Here, where I read shall join, this is our word lava. So, lamed vav hey, it's the same word when Leah bears Levi. She says, this will join me to my husband. She uses a form of lamed vav hey. And this passage, Isaiah 14, predicts a day where strangers will join themselves to the house of Jacob. Strangers will, okay? Now look at Isaiah 56. Isaiah 56. And verse 3. Let not the foreigner say, who has attached himself to the Lord will keep me apart from his people, and let not the eunuch say, I'm a withered tree. Where it says, let not the foreigner say, who has attached himself to the Lord. The root word there is lamed vav hey. It's the idea that you notice again that it's a foreigner. Notice that this connection is for a foreigner to Jehovah. In the previous text, in Isaiah 14, it's a foreigner attaching himself to the house of Jacob. In this one, it's a foreigner attaching himself to Jehovah. Look down at verse 6. As for the foreigners who attach themselves to the Lord, to minister to him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, all who keep the Sabbath and do not profane it, and who hold fast to my covenant, I'll bring them to my sacred mount and let them rejoice, and so forth. Isn't it interesting that once again we have the idea of foreigners who attach themselves to Jehovah? The word lamed vav hey indicates this connection. So not only, and it makes the point very clearly here, that this group of strangers, foreigners, that attach themselves, lamed vav hey, to Jehovah, they're included. Now look with me at Jeremiah chapter 50. Jeremiah chapter 50 and verse 5. Now I love this passage. Actually, we're going to look back at verse 4, Jeremiah 50 and verse 4. And it says, in those days and at that time declares the Lord, the people of Israel together with the people of Judah shall come, and they shall weep as they go to seek Jehovah their God. They shall inquire for Zion in the direction their faces shall turn. They shall come and attach themselves to Jehovah by a covenant for all time, which shall never be forgotten. My people were lost sheep. Their shepherds led them astray, drove them out to the mountains. They roamed from hill to mount. They forgot their own resting place. All you that love the study of the lost tribes, This is one of the passages where they're referred to as lost sheep. But notice in verse 5, what we get in verse 4 and 5 is that the people of Israel and the people of Judah are going to return. They're going to begin to return. Now look, their faces are towards Zion. And here's what they do. They say, "Can you help me? Which way is it to Zion?" And whoever they're asking is going to say, you're going in the right direction. You're facing the right direction. What I get from this is that somehow the God of all creation is drawing His people back. They've forgotten their resting place. They've become lost sheep. That's what it says. And they're walking their way back to Zion, weeping as they go. And they're already oriented in the right direction. This is why it's so important as people make their way back to Torah faith, you just get out of the way and keep heading them in the right direction. But this group, it says that they will seek Zion. They're going to come and attach themselves to Jehovah. Attach, there's our word. Lamed, Vav, Hey. Look at Zechariah. The prophet Zechariah. We want to go to Zechariah chapter 2. Zechariah chapter 2, and I just want to pick up verse 14. Shout for joy, fair Zion. For lo, I come, and I will dwell in your midst, declares Jehovah. In that day, many nations will attach themselves to Jehovah and become His people, and He will dwell in your midst. Then you will know that I was sent to you by Jehovah of hosts. Again, we have foreigners attaching themselves to Jehovah. This word, Lamed Vav Hey, does mean to attach, to join, to connect, to glue, to bond. There are other texts, just for your notes. This is mainly so that you have them in your notes. The other usages of Lamed Vav Hey, Psalm 83:9. We're not going to read these. Verse 8 in the English. Ecclesiastes 8:15. Esther 9:27 and Daniel 11:34 all mention the idea that we're talking about, the name or the word Lamed Vav Hey. But the name Levi does not mean join, connect, attach. It sounds like the word that means attach, join. Okay, let me give you an example. Here's what I used to think and what you might currently think about the connection between the naming of Levi and that word, what it means. Let's use an English example. If I want to use a word and connect it to its meaning, I'll say something like, somebody goes, "Ross, what are you going to name your son?" I'm going to name him Bond, like James Bond. I'm going to name him Bond because he will bind me and my wife together. Okay? So that's an example, not what we're dealing with, but that's an example where the name is tied to a word that means the same thing. I'll name my son Bond because he will bind my wife and I together. That's not what goes on here. It's a word play. It is a word play, and it only works in Hebrew. It is technically a form of what we call alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of initial consonants in a string of sounds, and it goes together. I'm going to give you examples of this. Leah comes up with a name that sounds like another word which has a different meaning because it's for her. She's coming up with a name that sounds like a word that means to connect and bond, to bind her and her husband together. because she believes that this third child, number 3, is a charm, that this is what's going to happen. But here's a better English example of what is going on here in Genesis 29:34. If I would say, I'm going to name my son Connor because he will connect me with my wife. Connor, connect. You see, they don't really mean the same thing, but there is an alliteration there. I'm going to name him Connor because he's the connector. And most people would go, what? But see, she's doing this for her. Here's another example. I'll name him Stan because now I'll stand with my wife. I'll name him Stan because now I'll stand. Doesn't really mean the same thing, but it's connected. I'll call him John, for he will join me to my husband. Sounds similar, but it's not the same. It's alliteration. Now, the truth is, the words Lamed Vav Hey and Lamed Vav Yud are no more linguistically connected than cat and can. Cat and can. People often, when they start learning Hebrew, they think, oh, this has the same 2 first letters, but a different last letter, but they probably mean close to the same thing. It's not the way Hebrew works. In this case, we're dealing with Lamed Vav is consistent between her meaning that she assigns, that root word, Lamed Vav Hey, and the name she chooses for a son, Lamed Vav Yud, but they're not connected. Cat, can. Same 2 first letters, different last letter. No one knows for sure what Levi means. But the biblical writer giving us the account from Leah wants us to make a connection through alliteration, a similarity of sound, an association that sticks. It bonds us to this meaning. And she's got the child, Levi, come, Levi. People are like, why is she naming that? I don't know, she's crazy. The historical meaning thus becomes fixed thanks to Leah. And it's an inside thing for her. I think it's brilliant. You know, we do this. We name people names that mean something to us personally. This is what she's doing. And she just likes the way it sounds. Hey, Jacob, would you like to come stay with me and the boys? Levi, come in. Come on, let's all join together as a family. That's her hope. Okay. Later, the descendants of Levi will become connectors between Israel and God, according to the biblical text. Interesting. Her idea, the connecting thing, turns out that's what Levi is used for. They will be joined to all the tribes in an interesting way. I'll give you one example. Look at the book of Numbers 18. Numbers 18. Numbers 18 says, verse 1, Jehovah said to Aaron, you and your sons and the ancestral house under your charge shall bear any guilt connected with the sanctuary. You and your sons alone shall bear any guilt connected with your priesthood. You shall also associate with yourself your kinsmen, the tribe of Levi, your ancestral tribe, to be attached to you and to minister to you while you and your sons under your charge are before the tent of the pact or the tent of the covenant. They shall discharge their duties to you and to the tent as a whole, but they must not have any contact with the furnishings of the shrine or with the altar, lest both they and you die. They, verse 4, shall be attached to you and discharge the duties of the tent of meeting, all the service of the tent and so forth. Now, twice in Numbers chapter 18, verse 1 through 4, we get the idea that Levi is going to be attached. Lava, the root word, lamed vav he. And this is ultimately the way that we know and have come to know the meaning associated with Levi. Levi is the one, based on Mama's naming, who ultimately is the connector, who is the joiner. This is going to play in as our study unfolds. So as it turns out, the house of Levi, the tribe of Levi, is one of the few things that even skeptical scholars are willing to admit suggest any Egyptian connection with ancient Israel. Levi is the link. So I call the class the Levitical Link because even the skeptics say, you know what? There's one thing that really rings true, and it's this Levitical link. What Levitical link? What's the connection? I'm glad you asked. From Genesis through the departure, the children of Israel are in Egypt, hundreds of years. You realize that every person in Egypt of the children of Israel has only known Egypt. I know we know this intuitively, but I want you to think, in a sense, they've all been Egyptians their whole life. Don't think that these people remember Israel. They don't remember Israel. They don't remember the land of Canaan. Maybe they have some stories they've heard. But what they remember and what we see their memories of, especially as you go through the Exodus narratives, the wilderness itineraries, what you see them saying is, we missed the leeks. We used to sit and eat and, you brought us out here to kill us. We could have died in Egypt. So you have to ask yourself, how bad was it really? But their memories are not of Canaan. Their memories are Egypt. But from Genesis through the departure, they're in Egypt. They've become part of the social culture and so forth. So one would suspect, or one would expect, I should say, to find that this sojourn experience left traces in Israelite culture, right? As it comes to us in the text. In other words, you would expect to find certain indications that Israel was in Egypt. A lot of the minimalist scholars say Israel wasn't in Egypt, and they used the text of the Bible to try to prove their point. What I'm doing is saying, no. We're going to use the text of the Bible and show you the missing link. We're going to show you that it has to do with Levi. This expectation that we would find traces of Egyptian culture in Israelite culture and vice versa is connected in one way in particular with the names. Now remember, a lot of our story comes from a book called Names. Shemot, Exodus is called Names in Hebrew. Now in ancient Egyptian records, we do find some Semitic names in the records. So like if you find certain engravings and, on the walls and in certain lists and so forth, tablets, you'll find Israelite names written in Egyptian characters. So that is Semitic. Let me say Semitic names. We don't know if they're Israelite necessarily. But Semitic sounding names are found in Egypt. But the real question is, do we find Egyptian names in the biblical records? Because that would show that some of these Israelites were named according to names in the culture in which they lived. So if you live in, let's say that you come from another country, and I'm using the U.S. because it's where I'm at. I know some of you are listening in from other countries. But one of the things that I find interesting is that sometimes family names from other countries, they move to the U.S. and they anglicize the name, or they change it, or they may even adopt another name, to make them more part of the culture in their mind. They might feel more welcome. They might feel more, you talk to someone and their name, I've had people say, my name is such and such, and they give a name that's foreign, and it's in another language, and I always want to say their name the way they want it. But sometimes they'll say, just call me Sam. And I'll always say, no, I want to call you by your name. How do you say it? I want to hear it. So there are Israelites who are named Egyptian names. Now, the important thing to know is that no less than, but arguably as many as 12, no less than 8, but as many as 12 names, biblical names, associated with people that we know from the Bible, have an Egyptian origin. So I'm going to say there are 8 for sure. These are Egyptian. And there are probably 2 to 4 more that are thought to be Egyptian names. Now, there are other words as well that people suspect, but we're just dealing with names today. So here's the idea. These names have their origin in the language of Egypt. Okay, perhaps you've heard of a few of them. You ready? How about Hophni? Hophni, you ever hear of that? How about Hur? Ever hear Hur? H-U-R, Hur? How about Pinchas? We have 2 people named Pinchas. Some people say Phinehas. Pinchas. We have a Merari. We have a Mushi. We have a Pashur. We have a Moshe. Moses. You see all these names? No doubt they're Egyptian. Now, we also have a couple more that most scholars have put the check mark by. Aharon, Aaron, Egyptian. How about this one? You ever heard of a girl named Miriam? Miriam is Egyptian. Various scholars have published papers on this. I read some long, detailed, tough papers this week on some of these names. You ever hear of a scholar by the name of Prop, P-R-O-P-P? Check his stuff out on the name Miriam and Hur and some of these names. It's deep, but it's interesting. Now, here is what is really interesting. The 8 out of 8 names in the Hebrew Bible that are clearly Egyptian, they're all Levites. They're all Levites. Those that are likely Egyptian, but may not be, are Levites. All right. Now, people can think of there might be, or what about Arabic? Are there other languages, other languages that are similar? When I say Egyptian, these names are known to be evidenced in Egyptian literature. They are Egyptian. There's no exception to this in biblical literature. There is no member of another tribe of Israel, none, that has an Egyptian name. Only Levites. Now, these names appear throughout the Tanakh in material written by more than 20 authors over at least 500 years. Okay? So this isn't just one book of the Bible. This is more than 20 authors throughout the biblical period, over 500 years. How many exceptions? None. Professor Michael Holman has shown this interesting connection between the Levites and Egypt. The Levitical connection that shows up throughout the Pentateuch is really makes you take a deep breath and say, I wonder why. So for instance, this Professor Michael Holman, who was a student of Richard Elliott Friedman, published a paper, and he shows that the tabernacle, which is managed by the Levites, right, bears the following resemblance to what we see in an Egyptian sacred place. Ready? Size, exact. Shape, exact. Proportions, courtyard, golden winged accoutrements, Eastern orientation and arrangement of inner and outer rooms match without exception. That's interesting. The Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, excuse me, bears many matches to an Egyptian object called the bark, which is a boat-type shaped object. But the bark and the ark tend to match. I picked a lot of this up studying Richard Elliott Friedman in his book on the Exodus. Very interesting take on some of this. But it's fascinating that the Leviticus, the Levites, are associated with the ark, and the ark is very similar to an object for similar purposes in ancient Egypt. Circumcision is something that is practiced in ancient Egypt. Many other cultural connections known to be priestly or Levitical are also found in Egyptian records. James Hoffmeyer puts it this way. James Hoffmeyer is a scholar. You can look him up. He says, while there is no direct evidence to prove the Exodus, the Egyptian linguistic and cultural background details in the Exodus narratives suggest a historical origin for Israel and Egypt that is most plausible. So he's willing to admit that when we see these evidences from the text of Israel's sojourn in Egypt, it makes it more likely that it really happened. The Levites, the preservers, the recorders of text and tradition of Israel, as it turns out, are the best link that we have to ancient Israel and Egypt. The Levites are. We know that the Levites would later superintend the holy functions in the holy places. Much of that sacerdotal role resembles various aspects of Egyptian religion, believe it or not. There's a connection there. There is a connection between what comes about in Israelite, particularly Levitical religion, is very, very close to what we see in Egypt in a lot of ways. The Levites have Egyptian names, and no other tribe has examples of Egyptian names, no exceptions. Now, the biblical religion may not reflect a total reliance upon things that were learned in Egypt, but they sure do look a lot alike. Levi may not be based on the Hebrew lava, but they sure do sound a lot alike. Moses and the children of Israel, according to the Bible, leave Egypt, but seem to bring some of Egypt with them. And it turns out that this helps us in our pursuit of the historical. When we look at and when we listen to and when we read these names and we see these associations, it gives us some veracity to the text. It gives us a way to validate the story. Now, other people and cultures bear on our man Moses. For instance, who is the wife of Moses, or wives? Question is, and we have to look at this, we have to investigate this. And we know one of his wives, or maybe it's just one wife, I'll get into that more, but one of his wives is named Zipporah. She's Midianite. What do we know about the Midianites and their influence on the Torah story, the story of Moses and the Exodus? What do we really know about Midian? Who is Zipporah? What's this strange thing that occurs in Exodus 4 that nobody understands about circumcising one of Moses' sons? And why didn't Moses circumcise his son? I mean, you'd think that the leader of Israel would know that circumcision is required, and yet he doesn't. Why not? It's a big question. Put that in a question mark column. But is Zipporah the same woman as the Cushite woman of Numbers chapter 12? And do we see a little bit of racism in there? Some kind of, what's the deal with Miriam and Aaron? Why do they get mad at Moses over this Cushite woman? Is she, as some people say, Ethiopian? Is she darker skinned? And could that be why Miriam is made white as snow? Wonder if that has anything to do with it as a punishment. You know? Who are the sons of Moses? And why did, get this, please hear this. Who are the sons of Moses, and why did a scribe purposely add a letter in the name of Moses in one text and admit that he did it? Could it be that he's covering up the fact that some of Moses' sons were priests? Is that allowed? Can other people be priests, or is it just the descendants of Aaron? Most of us understand that there's Levites, and then Aaron is a Levite, but his sons are Kohanim, his sons are priests. So the way people put it generally is they say, all priests are Levites, but not all Levites are priests. Guess what? That's not correct. Not according to the Bible anyway. We're going to look at all these things. We're going to continue this study. These details and more, we're going to cover them, but we're not going to do it today. We're going to do it beginning next week. Don't miss it. Join us next Saturday at 10:30 a.m. Central Time. Shabbat